I'll be making a cylinder and taking it off the wheel and putting it on a bat. Make sure your clay is well wedged in a brown ball, and then place it on a clean wheel head, slam it down, get your hands and clay wet. The first thing you'll do is push that lump of clay onto the wheel head to make sure it's secure. See how it's wobbling? I hold my hands steady and my arms steady around that wobbling piece of clay, and I press hard into it with my palms and fingers, and I squeeze it up into a cone, keeping it wet so it spins freely around in my hands. I'll press into the clay to make it a tall cone and gently push it back down. Push it up into a tall cone and then gently push it back down. So here it is, pretty tall, and then when I push it down, I'm just going to do it slowly so that I get the top part of the clay spinning smoothly without too many wobbles, and then I'll push it down further, down towards the base, where usually the clay is more wobbly. So when I'm centering, I'm doing this slowly, and I'm doing it deliberately and carefully, and one hand is doing more pushing, the other hand is holding it steady while I'm pushing. The way the hands work together keeps the clay from continuing to wobble. It is, of course, a lot of practice, but here I've centered the clay quickly, and so I can move on and just show you the steps for throwing a cylinder that's going to be fairly wide, and you can see how to use the pot lifts and take it off the wheel. So you see now this piece of clay doesn't have any wobbles, and it's time to open up the clay. My hands are around the clay and my thumbs press into the very top of that disc. Keeping it wet, I slowly push down to almost a 1/4 inch before I hit the wheel head. So I don't want to, of course, poke the clay all the way through because you need a base. I'll be using the pin tool to check on the thickness of this base that I am creating. It takes me a few tries in this sequence to get the thickness right. Right now it's a little too thick. It's closer to a 1/2 inch according to the pin tool. So I'll put my thumbs back in and I'll press a little bit more and I'll test it again. When I test it, I make sure that the hole is clean of water. I turn off the wheel head, stick the pin tool in, line my finger up at the base. Still a little bit thick, so I'm going to press in a tiny bit more and check it one more time. You see how I do everything the same though. I press in, I clean the water out, I use the pin tool, I poke it through, and then I see that, yeah, that's about a 1/4 inch, and that's a better thickness of a base. It's not good to have the clay too thick. Now it's time to open up the base of the pot so that I'm pulling my left hand straight flat across, but my right hand is holding steady on the outside. Even when I pull it as steady and carefully, the clay can have a bit of a wobble afterwards. Well, so if it does, put your hands around the clay and steady it again. Don't keep working with it. Steady it up, clean it off, look at what you've done. Try to get rid of any imperfections just by holding the clay. Then it'll be time to pull up the walls. When I pull up the walls, I have my left hand on the inside, my right hand on the outside. I use my 3 middle fingers to squeeze the clay and pull the walls up. First, I'm going to get rid of extra clay, extra moisture, extra water on the inside and the outside, and then of course I add more back into it. From here you can see how my left hand is going to squeeze the clay. I'm going to create a ridge. My right hand is going to support that, and there's also a ridge on the outside. But this ridge isn't going to be too thick, and I'm not going to try to do anything too dramatic for the first pull of this cylinder. So I'll squeeze it pretty gently, and I won't go too fast. I have to go in the same rhythm or speed as the wheel, so that as I'm pulling up, I'm working carefully with the speed of the wheel. And when you're pulling up walls, you really need the speed of the wheel to be pretty moderately slow, especially for beginners. Now from the outside you'll see there's a ridge, and the inside there's a ridge as well, and that ridge, which isn't a dramatic ridge, it's just some of the clay, is getting squeezed up from the bottom, and I'm pulling straight up. And my hands are really right across from each other, and they're working together. When I get to the rim, sometimes imperfections will come up to the top of the clay. So I'm just going to steady the clay again, stabilize the rim, and if it's really bad, I'll use the pin tool to trim off that top edge. But I don't think it'll be too bad in this piece of clay. Now for my third pull, again, I'm going to make a ridge, not too dramatic a ridge, and I'm still going to pull slowly and gently and carefully up. One of my elbows, my right elbow, is still anchored on my leg. My left hand is a little less anchored, but my shoulders are relaxed and I'm concentrating on what I'm doing. Now I've made 3 pulls to make a wide and pretty even cylinder. Using the sponge, I'm going to clean off all the extra water and slip or wet clay that's on this pot. Getting out all of the clay, all of the water, smoothing it out while it's on the wheel is better to do this now because when it's off the wheel, I don't like you to mess around with it too much. Now it's time to take this pot off the wheel. Squeeze water on the wheel head, take the wire cutters and pull them tightly underneath your pot. If you need to do it twice, fine. Clean the wire cutters off and pull again, making sure that that releases the pot from the wheel head. I'm on my way to find those pot lifts. When I get them, they need to be cleaned off. I rinse them in water, I use a sponge, and I wipe off all the extra clay that's on them from anybody else's pot. Once they're clean, I also make sure they've been rinsed in water, in relatively clean water, so that they'll slide underneath the cylinder easily. So they're rinsed in water and they're wet, and then I slide them firmly and flatly underneath the cylinder, and with a twisting motion let them get underneath the pot, and then I twist and lift the pot off. And it's going to go onto a small plaster bat which is readily available, and then I twist and pull the pot lifts off. If it gets stuck, I'll hold my finger at the base and pull the other pot lift off. Then your cylinder is done for now. Leave that out, and at the end of the class period, cover it in plastic, tucking the plastic underneath the white bat.